My twin brother was dying, a vibrant painting fading to a charcoal sketch, and our parents had already buried him in their hearts. But the true poison wasn't in his body. It was a forgotten memory, and only a stranger could see it. My twin brother Leo was dying, and my parents had already buried him. Not in the ground, not yet, but in their hearts. They had surrendered. Our home, once filled with the chaotic symphony of two identical lives running in parallel, had become a mausoleum, a shrine to a ghost who still drew breath in the room at the end of the hall. It started 6 months ago, a creeping lethargy that doctors first dismissed as depression. Then came the weight loss, the strange gray pallor to his skin, the way his joints ached until he could barely walk from his bed to the bathroom. Leo, my other half, the boy who could climb any tree and outrun anyone on the soccer field, was shrinking. He was a vibrant painting fading to a charcoal sketch before our very eyes. We saw specialist after specialist. They ran every test imaginable, scanning his brain, sampling his blood, mapping his genes. The conclusion was always the same: a shrug, a sympathetic tilt of the head, and the soul-crushing phrase, "We just don't know." It was a degenerative condition with no name, no cause, and no cure. My parents, bless their hearts, fought like lions at first. They flew in experts, researched obscure clinical trials, and filled our house with the cloying scent of herbal remedies and desperate hope. But hope is a finite resource. After months of watching their son wither into a fragile husk, theirs ran dry. The fight went out of their eyes, replaced by a hollow, preemptive grief. They stopped going into his room as often. My mother would leave his food tray outside the door, knocking softly before scurrying away as if the air in his room was toxic. My father would just stand in the hallway, staring at the closed door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They started talking about him in the past tense. Leo loved the beach, my mother would sigh, staring out the window. He had such a brilliant smile, my father would murmur, looking at old photographs. I refused to give up. At 27, we were supposed to be conquering the world together, not planning a funeral. I became his full-time nurse, his advocate, his only companion in a house that had abandoned him. I would read to him for hours, even when his eyes were closed, hoping the words would anchor him to the world. I'd sponge his feverish skin, change his sheets, and force him to take sips of nutrient shakes, all while fighting back the lump in my throat. I was holding on to a fraying rope, and my hands were bleeding, but I would not let go. The final nail in the coffin of my parents' hope was when our longtime housekeeper, Maria, quit. She tearfully told me she couldn't take the sadness anymore. The house, she said, felt heavy with death. I understood. Her leaving created a practical problem, but a much larger emotional one. It was another person giving up on Leo. My parents decided to hire a new maid through an agency, someone who didn't know our story, who would just come in, clean, and leave. They didn't want any more emotional attachments. That's how Alara came into our lives. She wasn't what I expected. She was a woman in her late 40s, with dark, knowing eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. She was unnervingly quiet. She moved through our silent house like a shadow, cleaning with an efficiency that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. She never asked about the closed door at the end of the hall. She never offered condolences or pitying looks. She just observed. She'd watch me trudge out of Leo's room, my face a mask of exhaustion, and her gaze would linger for a moment before she turned back to her work. For 2 weeks she was a silent presence in our home of ghosts. I barely registered her beyond the clean surfaces and the faint scent of lemon polish. I was too consumed by Leo. He was getting worse. He'd developed a tremor in his hands, and sometimes he would look at me with a terrifying vacancy, as if he didn't recognize me. One evening, I collapsed into a chair in the kitchen, burying my face in my hands, trying to suppress a sob. I had been trying to coax Leo to eat for an hour, only for him to spit up the single spoonful of soup I'd managed to get down. I felt a presence and looked up. It was Alara, wiping down the counter. She stopped her work, her rag held still in her hand. For the first time, she spoke to me about something other than cleaning supplies. Her voice was low and steady. "Miss," she began, her eyes not on my face but on my hands, which I was subconsciously rubbing. "Forgive me for my impertinence. Your hands, The joints ache, don't they? A little bit more each day." I froze, my breath catching in my chest. I had been ignoring the dull ache in my own knuckles, dismissing it as stress or fatigue. I just stared at her, unable to form a word. How could she know? She took a small step closer, her dark eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I have been watching," she said softly. "You have the same shadow in your eyes as he does. It is just paler. Tell me something, miss. The wonderful room you and your brother shared as children, the one with the galaxy painted on the ceiling. Did your father mix the silver paint for the stars himself? The special, shimmering one?" My blood ran cold. It was such a specific, bizarre question. A memory from over 20 years ago. My father, so proud of the special, lead-based pigment he'd found at an old hardware store, promising it would make our stars shine brighter than any others. How in the world could she possibly know that? My mouth went dry. The galaxy room. We'd moved out of it when we were 10, into separate bedrooms to give us our own space. The room was now my father's home office, repainted a sterile beige years ago. The stars were long gone, buried under layers of sensible emulsion. But I remembered them. I remembered lying in my bed next to Leo's, tracing the constellations with my finger, feeling like we were sleeping in the cosmos. And I remembered my father, his hands and clothes smudged with that shimmering silver paint, a proud magician creating our private universe. How could you know that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Ilara finally set her cleaning rag down on the counter. She turned to face me fully, her expression unreadable. "Where I come from," she said, her voice dropping lower, "we are taught to see the roots of things. Sickness is not always a monster that invades from the outside. Sometimes it is a seed planted long ago, in the very soil of a home. A seed that lies dormant until it finds the right ground to grow in." She looked pointedly at my hands, then gestured vaguely down the hall toward Leo's room. "You and your brother are the same ground. The seed has taken deep root in him. In you it is just beginning to sprout." It was insane. It was the stuff of folklore and old wives' tales. Heavy metals, lead poisoning. Of course, the doctors had tested for that. The results were always normal, well within safe limits. I started to say so, to dismiss her, but the words died on my tongue. The doctors had tested for everything they knew, but their knowledge had led to a dead end. Ilara was talking about something else, something older. A seed. A shadow. And she had known about the paint. "It's called starlight poison, where I am from," she continued, as if sensing my internal battle. "A dust that loves the bones. It settles deep and sleeps for years. It mimics other illnesses. It confuses doctors who look for loud, obvious poisons. This one is quiet, a whisper, but for those with the same blood, born under the same moon, it sings a song only they can hear. For one, it becomes a shout. For the other, a hum. A shout and a hum. The perfect description of what was happening to Leo and me. A desperate, terrifying hope began to bloom in my chest, a feeling so foreign I almost choked on it. "What do we do?" I asked, the words rushing out. "Can you help? Is there a cure?" "Cures are for doctors," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "I only know remedies, ways to coax the poison out, to cleanse the ground. It is slow, it is difficult, and it requires belief." Belief was all I had left. That night I cornered my parents in the living room. They were watching some mindless sitcom, the canned laughter echoing horribly in the silent house. I took a deep breath and told them everything Ilara had said. I told them about the paint, the starlight poison, the seed planted in their sons 20 years ago. I watched their faces shift from vacant sadness to confusion, and then to a deep, painful anger. "Enough!" my father roared, slamming his hand on the arm of his chair. He shot to his feet, his face flushed. "Have you lost your mind? You're going to listen to the superstitious nonsense of a maid. We have seen the best doctors in the country. They don't know, so you think she does? But Dad, she knew about the paint," I pleaded. "How could she know that detail?" "It's a lucky guess, a trick. These people prey on the grieving," he spat. "I will not have you entertaining this fantasy. She's fired. She'll be gone in the morning." "No." The word tore from my throat. My mother flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Sarah, don't do this to us. We can't hope again. It will break us." That was it. They weren't angry because they thought Elara was a fraud. They were terrified she might be right. Hope was a monster they had already slain, and they couldn't bear to see it resurrected. I saw then that I was truly alone in this fight. I backed away, nodding numbly, and fled the room before they could see my resolve harden into steel. I found Elara in the kitchen, packing her things into a small bag. "They are letting you go," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I won't let them," I said, my voice low and fierce. "You're not leaving. You're going to help me. I'll pay you myself. Anything you want. Just tell me what to do first." She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching my face. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle and a jar of thick, dark honey. "The poison has entwined itself with his spirit. We must first give the spirit something else to hold on to. Something sweet from the earth." She instructed me to mix a spoonful of the honey with warm water and a pinch of the herbs from the bundle. "Give him this, every 4 hours. Do not miss a time. And Sarah," she said, her grip on my arm surprisingly strong, "you must drink it too. Remember the hum." I did as she said. I told my parents Elara had agreed to stay on for another week to help me transition to caring for the house myself. It was a lie, but it bought me time. That night I slipped into Leo's room. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. I gently lifted his head and tipped the sweet, earthy liquid into his mouth. He swallowed weakly. Then, sitting in the dark of my own room, I drank the same mixture. It tasted of moss and wildflowers. I did it again 4 hours later, and again 4 hours after that. My entire being focused on this one, simple ritual. The next morning I went to wake Leo. For the past month, waking him had been nearly impossible. He would remain in a state of semi-consciousness, his eyes barely fluttering. But this time, as I whispered his name, his eyelids opened. They didn't just flutter. They opened. And his eyes, usually cloudy and unfocused, were clear. He looked directly at me. His lips, chapped and pale, parted. A dry, rasping sound came from his throat, a voice I hadn't heard in months, and he spoke a single, impossible sentence. "Sarah," he rasped, his gaze shifting to the window. I dreamt of the sun. It felt warm. Tears streamed down my face, hot and sudden. I grabbed his hand, so thin it felt like a collection of twigs wrapped in paper. It was cold, but there was the faintest pressure, a ghost of his old grip. "The sun is still here, Leo," I choked out, pulling back the heavy curtains to let the morning light flood the room. He blinked against the brightness, a genuine conscious reaction that felt like a bigger miracle than the parting of the Red Sea. He had dreamt. He had felt something. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was a flicker in the suffocating darkness, and I would fan that flicker into a flame if it was the last thing I did. Elara and I fell into a clandestine routine. By day she was the silent, efficient maid, and my parents, wrapped in their bubble of grief, barely noticed her. By night she was my mentor, my alchemist, my priestess. She taught me how to prepare the remedies. The first was the honey and herbs, which she called the sweet anchor. After 3 days of Leo taking it, he started staying awake for longer periods. He was still weak, unable to sit up on his own, but his mind was present. He'd follow me with his eyes as I moved around the room. He even smiled once, a faint crack in the marble of his face, when I told him a stupid joke we'd shared as kids. And for me, the dull ache in my knuckles had vanished. The hum was quieting. My parents remained willfully blind. My mother would bring Leo's tray and find the bowl empty, and she'd whisper, "Oh, Sarah, you're so good to him, cleaning up so he doesn't have to see it," assuming I was the one eating his food to spare his feelings. My father refused to even look into the room. He couldn't bear to see the improvement, because that would mean admitting he'd given up. His denial was a fortress, and I didn't have the strength to storm its walls. Not yet. After a week, Elara introduced the next phase, the stone tea. She brought me a collection of smooth, grey river stones, covered in what looked like a dried, dark green moss. She instructed me to boil them in spring water until the water turned the color of a weak green tea, then have Leo drink a cup every evening. The poison is a mineral from the earth, she explained, her voice a low murmur in the quiet kitchen. So we must use the earth to draw it out. The stones hold the memory of clean water. They will remind his body how to be clean again. It sounded like madness, boiling rocks, but I had seen Leo smile. I would have boiled the moon itself if she'd asked me to. The tea was surprisingly tasteless, and Leo drank it without protest. Every day he seemed to reclaim a tiny piece of himself. The tremors in his hands lessened. The gray pallor of his skin began to recede, replaced by the faintest hint of his natural color. I felt it too. A fog I hadn't even realized was clouding my mind began to lift. I felt lighter, more energetic. The true turning point came about 3 weeks after Alara's arrival. I was helping Leo with some gentle stretches, his arms and legs still weak as a newborn's. Alara was changing the sheets on his bed. Suddenly, Leo stopped and looked at Alara, truly looked at her for the first time. "Thank you," he said. His voice was still weak, a dry rustle of leaves, but it was clear. Alara paused, a clean white sheet in her hands. She met his gaze and gave a small, respectful nod. "The thanks belong to the earth," she said simply, "and to your sister." She did not let go of the rope. That evening, something shifted in the house. My father was walking down the hall, and I had left Leo's door ajar. Leo was sitting propped up against his pillows, and I was reading to him from one of our favorite childhood adventure books. My father stopped dead in the doorway. He stared, his face ashen. He saw his son, not as a dying ghost, but as a person. He saw him sitting up. He saw him listening. He saw him turn his head and look at him. My father's carefully constructed fortress of denial crumbled in an instant. He staggered back, one hand flying to his mouth, and then he turned and fled, the sound of a strangled sob echoing down the hall. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. The atmosphere in the house grew thick with unspoken things. Then, on the 3rd day, he appeared at the door of Leo's room. I was helping Leo eat some mashed banana, his first solid food in months. My father didn't look at me. He only had eyes for his son. "Leo," he said, his voice thick with a pain and hope so intertwined it was impossible to separate them. Leo turned his head slowly. He looked at our father, the man who had grieved for him while he was still alive. A dozen emotions flickered across Leo's face. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Dad," he said. It was enough. That night my father found me in the kitchen. He looked old and broken. "The maid," he said, not looking at me. "Whatever she is doing, whatever you are paying her, I will double it. Just don't stop." It was a truce, an admission. It was forgiveness. With my father's silent backing, the final phase of the remedy began. Alara called it the deep cleanse. It was the most difficult. It involved a poultice made of clay, crushed charcoal, and a pungent mixture of herbs she kept in a locked wooden box. Every night for a week, I was to cover Leo's chest and back with the thick black paste and wrap him in old linen cloths.
"This will pull the last of the poison's shadow from his lungs and heart," she warned. "It will be unpleasant. He will feel as if he is ill all over again."
His body will fight to hold on to the poison it has known for so long. You must be strong for him. She was right. The first night of the poultice was hell. Leo developed a fever. He was delirious, thrashing in his bed, muttering about silver stars and cold, dark spaces. He sweat so profusely I had to change the linens 3 times. My mother, hearing his cries, rushed to his door, her face a mask of terror. "What have you done to him?" she shrieked at me. "You're killing him with this witchcraft." My father grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Let her work," he said, his voice a low command. We tried our way. Now it's her turn. For 3 nights I held my brother's hand through fevered nightmares, sponging his forehead, whispering assurances, my heart pounding with fear. Was I killing him? Had I traded a slow, quiet death for a fast, agonizing one? On the 4th morning, I was delirious with exhaustion. I unwrapped the poultice and my heart stopped. Streaked across the dried, gray clay, concentrated over the area of his heart and lungs, were shimmering, metallic, silver veins. They glittered under the lamplight, like a constellation of death drawn out of my brother's body. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't just a mark, it was the poison, made visible. It was the shimmering, malevolent ghost of my father's special paint, pulled from the depths of my brother's body. I carefully scraped a small sample of the clay into a plastic bag before cleaning Leo up. He was weak, exhausted, but his fever had broken. His skin, for the first time in months, was cool to the touch. He slept a deep, peaceful sleep unlike any I had seen him have since this nightmare began. I showed the clay to Alara. She simply nodded, her expression calm, as if she had expected this all along. "The poison has a body," she said softly. "Now it can be cast out, and—" For the next 3 nights, the silver veins in the clay poultice grew fainter and fainter, until on the 7th and final morning, the clay was just plain, gray and clean. That same day, Leo sat up on the edge of his bed, on his own, and put his feet on the floor. The change in our house was seismic. The suffocating silence was replaced by the sound of physical therapy, of my father's quiet encouragement, of my mother's hesitant, hopeful humming as she cooked Leo's favorite meals, modifying them into soft, easy-to-swallow versions. They never asked Alara about her methods. They treated her with a kind of reverent distance, as if she were a visiting dignitary from a land they couldn't possibly comprehend. They saw the miracle, and that was enough. They didn't need to understand the magic. I, however, did. One afternoon, I took the plastic bag with the silver-veined clay to a friend who worked in a university's geology lab. I didn't tell him the story. I just said it was a soil sample from our backyard, and I was curious about its mineral content. The results came back a week later. He called me, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Sarah, where did you say you got this? It's extraordinary. It's full of a lead-bismuth alloy, but in a particulate form I've never seen. It's almost like a metallic dust, highly toxic, of course. Long-term exposure to something like this. It would be devastating. It would cause systemic organ failure, neurological damage. It would mimic 1,000 other diseases. And it's so fine, it wouldn't show up on standard heavy metal blood tests unless you were specifically looking for this exact, bizarre compound." I hung up the phone, the validation a cold, hard stone in my stomach. Alara hadn't been speaking in metaphors about starlight poison and evil seeds. She had identified a literal physical poison that the entire medical establishment had missed. A poison my father had unknowingly painted onto our childhood ceiling. Leo's recovery was slow but steady. First, he walked to the bathroom. A week later, he walked down the hall. A month after that, we sat together on the back porch, feeling the real sun on our faces. He was still thin, his movements careful, but the light was back in his eyes. The shadow was gone. We talked for hours, filling in the 6-month chasm that had been ripped from his life. He told me about the dreams, not just the one of the sun, but of the cold, of sinking into gray fog, of hearing my voice as if from a great distance, a rope thrown into the abyss. "You never let go," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he squeezed my hand. One evening, I found Alara in the kitchen, her small bag packed by the door. My heart sank. "You're leaving," I said. She nodded. "The ground here is clean. My work is done." My parents came and stood with me. My father held out an envelope thick with cash. "This is for you," he said, his voice heavy. "It's not enough. Nothing could ever be enough. But thank you." Ilara looked at the envelope but didn't take it. She looked at my father, then my mother. "You have your son back," she said. "And you have your daughter who is stronger than you knew. That is my payment." She then turned to me. "Keep the stones," she advised. "Once a year, make the tea. Just to remind the body. The hum may be quiet, but the echo can remain for a long time." She walked out our front door and into the twilight, as quietly as she had arrived. We never saw her again. There was no trace of her at the agency my parents had used. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air just to save us. Life found a new normal, a better one. My parents' preemptive grief was replaced by a profound, humbled gratitude. They looked at Leo and at me with an awe that was almost painful to witness. They had been forced to the edge of the abyss and had been pulled back by a miracle they couldn't explain. The bond between me and Leo, always strong, was now unbreakable, forged in the crucible of his illness and my refusal to surrender. We both drank the stone tea once a year, a quiet ritual of remembrance and gratitude. Sometimes late at night, I think about Alara. I don't know who she was or where she came from. A healer? A mystic? An angel disguised as a maid? Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that she saw what no one else could. She saw the forgotten poison of the past, the shimmering stars my father painted out of love, which had nearly become our tomb. She looked into the heart of our family's despair and found not a cure, but a remedy, rooted in the earth, in belief, and in the stubborn refusal of one sister to let go of the rope. She didn't just save my brother's life. She saved all of ours.